As much as we as a community tend to make fun about Ubuntu for being bloated or a noob distro or your beginner step towards Linux, it is still one of the biggest distributions out there and one of the most relevant. And it's time for a new update to it, version 25.10, codenamed the Questing Quokka. This one is the last update before the next big LTS 26.04, and so it comes with a bunch of important changes under the hood, but also visually and to its desktop experience. So we're gonna take a look at everything that changed in Ubuntu 25.10, and we'll take a look at our sponsor, ProtonVPN. Now by now you probably all know why having a VPN at the ready is probably not a bad idea, whether you just want to watch stuff that is not available in your country, if you want to stay stealthy on the internet and make sure that your ISP or your government cannot really track or see what you're doing, whether you're trying to protect your private life, whether you're trying to do anything online, a VPN is a very handy tool. And the one I use personally is ProtonVPN. They are super fast, they can block ads, they have servers in virtually every country out there, and it comes free with your Proton Mail account, although of course they have paid plans if you need more features, faster speeds, access to more servers. It is a fantastic VPN that I use very regularly when I just want to make sure that what I'm visiting and what I'm doing isn't logged when I'm on a public Wi-Fi or any other network that I don't fully trust. It's great. As usual, the link is in the description. Check it out if you want to get started with ProtonVPN. Okay, so let's begin with all the changes to the Ubuntu desktop itself. So first off, that's not specifically an Ubuntu change, but that's a change that's coming to most, if not all, GNOME-based distributions, and that's the fact that it is now Wayland only. Ubuntu doesn't give you an X11 session for GNOME anymore. They followed the recommendations of GNOME, which removed the ability to launch an X11 session. As far as I can tell, they don't offer you a way to restore it. If you decide to install any other desktop instead of GNOME, you can still run your X11 session if you want it, but the GNOME session will be Wayland only, no more X11. It was pretty certain that Ubuntu was going to follow this change made by GNOME. GNOME is doubling down on this. Normally in GNOME 50 you will not be able to launch an X11 session at all. The code will actually be stripped from GDM and from GNOME. If I understood how they want to do things correctly, Ubuntu will very likely follow suit. I don't see them maintaining a specific fork or version of GNOME that still patches in X11 compatibility. So presumably Ubuntu is now Wayland only forever if you decide to go with the GNOME edition. Now, Ubuntu 25.10 also adds a few changes in the Yaru theme. These are not major changes. There's a few more icons. Since they moved to Loop, the new image viewer, they refined that icon to reflect that change. It's also the same with the new terminal, which is called Ptixis or Ptixis if you don't want to pronounce the P at the beginning. It is just called terminal here, and it has an icon that is sort of very similar to the previous one, but a little bit different. Now the trash icon was changed a little bit as well. You also have slightly revamped icons for the system monitor, for the firmware updater, for GNOME Builder if you decide to install it, for GNOME Software if you decide to install it, but these are relatively minor changes. I'm not a big Ubuntu user, so I can't really say if they are super different, but to my eyes, they really look similar. You also have improvements to the sharpness and the design of the various status icons you'll see in the top bar as well. When your battery is charging, you have more battery statuses with the little green bar charging your battery growing bigger and bigger as the battery is charging. You have a new spinner that is a bit less jittery and looks a bit smoother, although again, these are refinements and not major changes to the Yaru theme. I still feel that Yaru is a very competent theme. It takes the Advaita look and padding and roundness and it gives it just a little bit more color, a little bit more depth and contrast. I think it's fine. I think it looks good. I think Ubuntu has a good default visual style, especially since you can now change the orange color if you don't like it with the support of accent colors inside of GNOME. If you use the Ubuntu dock in non-panel mode, so if you just want a dock, not a side panel, the corner radius has been improved, so it matches the one of the right-click context menu. The outline itself is now the same radius, and it should also match with the radius of various icons that you use in the Yaru theme, so things look a little bit more consistent. Now you have some changes to the default app selection in Ubuntu as well. First, they now default to the Loop image viewer, just like GNOME has done for the past few releases. It is a fantastic viewer for your photos. It supports multi-touch gestures if you want to swipe or zoom in and out of your pictures. It also has a few tools to crop and change the aspect ratio of your images, place them in portrait or in landscape mode. You can rotate the images, you can flip them. It's simple, but it lets you save, replace the original. It has a bunch of features, it's nice. I honestly thought that Ubuntu already used Loop as the default. I was surprised at this change, but it is a good one. It is the default app in GNOME. It's solid. There's no reason not to use it instead of a previous GNOME app that might not look right on recent GNOME desktops. You also have a new terminal app called Ptixis, or Tixis if you don't want to pronounce the P at the beginning. In Ubuntu, it's just called Terminal. It has a few options, basically the same settings that you could find in the previous terminal app that they shipped. You have your color profiles, you have some font and cursor settings, you have a bunch of toggles and settings you can change to make sure your terminal behaves as you like. You can, of course, view and configure those keyboard shortcuts if you want. And it supports profiles, of course. It is a competent, really good terminal. It has that nice little tab view that also lets you navigate relatively easily between various programs you might have launched in various tabs. It's a solid terminal, good choice, it works well. Now, something that is now missing from Ubuntu is the Startup Apps application. This was a little launcher that lets you configure which applications actually start when you boot up your computer. This has been replaced by settings on a per app basis, meaning if you want to set an application to auto start, you have to go into its app page and enable it with the auto start permission. This is a regression, in my opinion, for a few reasons. First, it doesn't seem like you can install the previous graphical tool anymore. It's just not available in the repos. If you try to install the GNOME-startup-applications, it tells you it has been replaced by another package, which doesn't have that graphical feature. Second, you'll need to go in and out of every app that you want to make auto start. And if you want to check which applications do auto start with your session, you have to go into every app listing and uncheck the thing that you don't want. You don't have a bird's eye view of everything that opens when you start your computer. And finally, you also lose the ability to add a custom command or a custom command that points to a script you have written, which is something the startup apps supported. Meaning now, if you want to auto start a specific custom script, you have to do it through the command line or by creating a .desktop file that you place in your auto start folder. There is no graphical way of doing that properly, so I think that's not a really good change, in my opinion. Now, in the installer itself, there is only one major change, and that's if you decide to go with the hardware-backed encryption, meaning you're gonna use the TPM chip that comes in your computer in at least most recent computers. This will only work if you have a TPM2 chip now, meaning you kind of have the same requirements to use that as the ones that you need to install Windows 11 now. And if you decide to go with that hardware-backed encryption, you still have the option to set a passphrase if you want to make sure that you do need to type something to unlock your computer at boot time. It's just some nice added security if you want it, but it is still judged experimental, so only use it if you don't care about losing what's on that drive. Now let's move on to what has changed under the hood. One of the big changes that most users will not notice is that the core utilities, meaning the GNU basic tools, the GNU core utils, have been replaced by a Rust version of the exact same commands. The commands you know and use are still here. The sudo command still works exactly as it used to. If you try to use anything like ls, move, copy, whatever else, they all work as you expect. The sort command, anything has the same options, the same command line utilities, the same shortcuts. It should work and be a drop-in replacement. So if you use this on a desktop and you don't have very complicated use cases for those core utilities, you probably will not notice that change. But it is a change, and some options that you know or use might not be available in the utility that has replaced the older GNU core utils, and also there have been some bug reports about some performance problems or some commands not completing properly. Those, as far as I could tell, have been mostly addressed, but there might still be some issues here and there. So if you have built a ton of custom scripts using those core utilities, using some very advanced options and some specific configurations, maybe they will no longer work, maybe they will work fine. You will need to test them to make sure everything works properly. That's why they're implementing this change in 25.10, because it lets them see if that will work in 26.04, or if there are too many reports of problems and stuff that is broken by this change, and so they will revert back in 26.04. At least I assume that's the plan. Another small change under the hood is the fact that they replaced their network time protocol utility by Crony, which does the thing that you would expect. It gets time over the network to make sure that the clock displays the correct time depending on where you are located. The older init ramfs tools have also been replaced by Dracut. This is something you might be very familiar with if you used Fedora for any amount of time, because that's what Fedora and a lot of Red Hat based systems have defaulted to now. It is, I think, a more solid way of handling that init ramfs and building that init ramfs. And if you're wondering what the init ramfs is, then probably this change doesn't affect you, but if you're still wondering, it stands for Initial RAM File System. When you load your Linux kernel, you first load an image called the init ramfs. This initializes your environment, loads some device drivers, makes sure that your root partition can be mounted and can boot, potentially decrypts your hard drive if it's encrypted, and then you launch your real full-fat Linux system. This was managed by a collection of scripts called the initramfs tools in Ubuntu. This is being replaced with Dracut. It is just another way of handling the same thing. Now, another change is a replacement for how telemetry is collected inside of Ubuntu. Now, you still have the full ability to disable that entire telemetry at install. If you have not disabled it at install, you can use the command ubuntu insights consent-else false, and it will set your consent for this data collection to false. You can also tell it to collect data and see exactly what it has collected. This is going to be the new tool for telemetry. It is still entirely optional. You will be able to opt out of it just as before. In the installer, it is still set as on by default. You have to opt out of it, which I still don't like. I think it should be opt-in by default, but it doesn't seem very invasive, and this new tool doesn't seem to collect more than what was collected previously, so I don't think it is an issue at all. Now, this was for the Ubuntu specific changes, but you also have all the GNOME 49 changes, because that's what Ubuntu 25.10 comes with, GNOME 49. Now, GNOME 49 comes with a bunch of improvements to Mutter, the window manager and compositor. This includes multiple new Wayland protocols being implemented for better handling of the mouse cursors, notably. You also have better fractional scaling. It should be way smoother. Fonts should look much better now in GNOME 49. You also now have support for ICC color profiles if your display has one. It's just a better, smoother window manager. Virtually every single version of GNOME comes with improvements to this, and as the Wayland transition progresses, you also get more and more protocols to handle all the various changes and all the new stuff that is added to that display server or display system. You also now have the Do Not Disturb toggle straight in the quick settings. It was previously in this time and date pop-up, which made sense because that's where you had notifications. It was moved here to the quick settings, where you basically have all the settings. It makes sense in that place as well. If you have multiple monitors or just a single monitor that supports adjusting the brightness, which is not the case here because I'm recording this all on a VM, you will also have multiple brightness sliders in those quick settings, so you can adjust the brightness for every single monitor, and that includes adjusting the brightness for HDR monitors, or at least if you have enabled HDR in the settings, if your monitor supports it as well. Now, these little pop-ups in the GNOME shell also animate a little bit differently than previously. This is a small visual change, but I think it looks pretty nice. You also have a big improvement to accessibility straight from the login screen with that new accessibility button that lets you turn on or off a variety of accessibility related features, including the screen reader, the zoom, so you can actually see what you're doing if you have problems with seeing tiny stuff on screen. You have the high contrast mode as well, which doesn't seem to do anything by default on Ubuntu. I think maybe they haven't implemented a high contrast version of Yaru, which is kind of a problem. You have the large text option. You have a bunch of options to make sure that you can actually log in if you have any kind of visual disability. On the lock screen, you will also find a small media control widget where you will see the current application that is playing anything, audio or video. Here it is Firefox with a YouTube video, and you have playback controls to go to the next or previous track if you have one, and to play and pause stuff. So you don't have to unlock your entire computer to interact with this. This is a pretty cool change. Now in Nautilus, you now have a new search pop-up, which lets you select various tags so you can have a more visual search. I think it looks really good. Some of you on my GNOME 49 video had a very interesting remark, which is that you cannot apparently select multiple tags if you want to search for multiple file types at the same time, which is in fact a bit annoying, I will admit. It would be nice if you could multi-select those tags, but you also have now a little date range selector and a little calendar to actually pick the dates instead of having to type them manually if you prefer that. It is a good improvement to search, but it would be cool to have multiple selection in there. When you decide to cut something in Nautilus, it will also be replaced with a small outline and a cut icon, so you actually know what you have selected. Previously, I think it was just made slightly translucent, so this is actually way more visual to know what you're actually going to move around. You also have a new keyboard shortcut in Nautilus, which is Ctrl+Dot, and it lets you open a terminal window straight in the directory that you're currently in. So if I go into my downloads directory and press Ctrl+Dot, I'm opening a new terminal window that is located in my downloads directory. Now, I wanted to take the opportunity to correct a few mistakes I made in my GNOME 49 review, specifically on the Papers PDF viewer. This is not a new app in Ubuntu, but it was made the default in GNOME 49. I said there that it did not support annotations, which it did. I just don't call these annotations because in French these are called notes. An annotation would be text overlaid on top of the PDF itself, not text contained in a note. I'm sorry I didn't explain that better. And I also said it did not support highlighting text, which obviously it did. I don't know why I said that. I'm stupid. I just didn't look at what I was doing, probably. The other mistake I made in my GNOME 49 video is about the calendar. I basically glossed over all the important changes that they made on the accessibility front. Unfortunately, on Ubuntu 25.10, it doesn't look like you're getting that version of GNOME Calendar. It seems stuck to 48. This is a daily build from Wednesday, the day before the final release, and it doesn't have GNOME Calendar 49, so you're probably not getting these improvements, which is a shame because how the developers put it is that the app is now fully usable with just a keyboard or with any assistive technologies, which was a lot of work. I glossed over that in my GNOME 49 review, and I'm very sorry if that didn't reflect the actual state of those applications. Now, I'm still absolutely baffled at how or why Ubuntu decides to go with certain application versions. They ship GNOME 49, they ship most of the apps in GNOME 49 in their latest version, but not all of them. I don't know if it's because the changes they make to Advaita to build Yaru, which maybe broke the calendar with them, but in that case you fix your theme, you don't ship an older version that will prevent a lot of people from having a nicer experience. I just don't think they make the right call by sticking with older versions. Maybe this will be updated to Calendar 49 for the final release, but as this daily build fully updated, it doesn't have it. The text editor also now remembers your sessions, meaning that if you have multiple documents open when you actually close the application, it will resume your previous session with documents being reopened in tabs, and it will also keep your place in the document that you were currently typing or writing, which is pretty cool to have as a feature. You also have improvements to GNOME Maps, letting you click street names and street numbers and save those as favorites, but Ubuntu doesn't ship that application by default even if it's full installed. And you also have improvements to the GNOME camera, which now defaults to MP4 and H.264 if you have the required plugins. GNOME software is also way faster than previously, but Ubuntu uses their own Ubuntu App Center, so you're not getting that in Ubuntu either. There's also a feature that Ubuntu removed from GNOME, and this is the donation banner that GNOME added in the About page. GNOME 49 added a little donation banner right here. I think it's just above the device name, which you can click and get to the donations page of GNOME. Ubuntu decided to remove it. I understand the reasoning why. It's probably not to confuse people who think they're having an operating system, having references to stuff that they don't understand. They don't know really what GNOME is. They don't know why they should donate to GNOME and not to Ubuntu. I understand the reasoning. I still think most people who use Ubuntu know what GNOME is and what a Linux distro is and would not be too baffled by this. And I think it just removes one big opportunity for GNOME to get donations, but I also understand why they wanted to make it. They want to make a unified product called Ubuntu. They don't want to showcase the different parts that they used to build the entire system. Finally, when you're using a remote desktop client to access GNOME over a network connection, it now supports multi-touch input, meaning you could use a remote desktop client on a tablet or a touchscreen, and it would register your taps on the actual GNOME desktop you're remoting to. It also supports relative mouse input, which should help with playing video games over the remote desktop when you're remoting into a GNOME client. And you can now set up new additional virtual monitors when you're remoting into a GNOME desktop, meaning remote desktop when remoting into GNOME is actually way better than it was in GNOME 48. Those are cool improvements, and they will work on Ubuntu as well because they're part of the core GNOME desktop itself. And of course, you have the usual updates to most of the packages in the repos, most of the snaps that Ubuntu ships. You have the Linux kernel 6.17, the latest version of systemd that GNOME relies upon now to launch its session, and all the updates to the usual NVIDIA drivers, Mesa drivers. It is a very solid update. Now, there are some things that you might not want or like in this Ubuntu version. It does change a lot of stuff. First, the removal of the X11 session. It's not an Ubuntu-specific change, it's made by GNOME, but it's still a change that they followed. So if you really liked X11 over Wayland, well, you probably need to find another distro, or you need to find another desktop environment that you prefer using. If you had some really, truly super complex custom scripts built using the GNU core utility, so your basic set of command line utilities on Linux, you probably want to double check them just to see if the Rust-based alternatives are a full drop-in replacement, or if there are a few things that you need to tweak. Technically, there shouldn't, but you probably should double check. The removal of the Startup Applications utility is also, in my opinion, a bad change because the graphical features that they have to replace it don't have the full feature set that the previous app had, so that's, in my opinion, a regression. It's not a major one, but it's still a bit annoying, and you still have that weird mismatch of version numbers. I don't know why Ubuntu keeps going back to shipping older versions of applications instead of the full fat set of GNOME apps at the same release number. This here only seems to affect the calendar, but maybe I missed something else. It's really annoying that they don't ship the full GNOME experience. I don't think that's a good idea. Apart from that though, if none of these changes affect you, it is a good release. You do have newer drivers, a newer kernel, much better performance, a lot of the improvements of GNOME 49, which is a fantastic version. So if you are an Ubuntu user and you don't just stick to LTSs, you probably want to move to Ubuntu 25.10. Provided that none of those big changes of under the hood stuff or feature stuff affect you in a bad way. Anyway, that will be it for this video. As usual, I'll leave you in the capable hands of myself talking about our sponsor, Tuxedo Computers. You all know about them by now. They've been a sponsor of this channel for more than 3 years now, I think. They also sponsor my weekly news podcast. They are great. They make laptops and desktops that ship with Linux pre-installed. They have tons of options for laptops and desktops, from the smallest form factor at the lowest price possible for a Linux device, all the way up to giant workstations, gaming laptops, gaming towers, you name it. Plenty of choice in the hardware, in the logo you want to have engraved on it, in the keyboard layouts that you want. I personally only use their computers. I don't have a daily driver computer that is not made by Tuxedo, and I'm super happy about it. They actually rely on Ubuntu to build their own distro called Tuxedo OS. Anyway, you know where to go if you are interested. The link is in the description. Do check them out. They're really cool. So thank you all for watching or listening in the background. You know where all the usual YouTube buttons are, the comment section, whatever. You know what to do in there. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for the support. And I guess you'll see me or hear me in the next video. Bye.